Love is a dangerous game, but in the underworld, it's a lethal weapon. When Beatrice, a plus-sized heiress with a brilliant mind, was forced to marry Gabriel Moretti, the city's most ruthless crime boss, she dared to hope he saw past her weight, until one night, hiding in the shadows of his mahogany study, she heard the brutal truth that shattered her soul. But the Mafia boss didn't realize one thing. A broken woman with nothing to lose is the most dangerous enemy of all. The Moretti estate in upstate New York was a fortress of cold, imported Italian marble, towering wrought iron gates, and suffocating silence. For Beatrice Kensington, now Beatrice Moretti, it was a gilded cage designed to hold a very specific prize. She was not the prize, her inheritance was. Beatrice was a woman who took up space in a world that demanded women be invisible, slight, and decorative. She was fat. She carried her weight in soft, generous curves that defied the razor-sharp, size-zero aesthetics of the Mafia wives she was suddenly forced to associate with. Her entire life, her father, Robert Kensington, had shielded her from the cruel whispers of high society, nurturing her brilliant mind instead of criticizing her waistline. Robert owned Kensington Global Shipping, a massive logistics empire that controlled 3 of the most crucial ports on the East Coast. When Robert's heart failed him 6 months ago, he left Beatrice with a multi-billion-dollar empire and a target on her back. The vultures of the underworld circled immediately. To protect her, Robert had arranged a marriage of convenience on his deathbed with Gabriel Moretti, the young, terrifyingly calculating head of the Moretti syndicate. Gabriel needed clean ports to move his illicit cargo. Beatrice needed the heavily armed protection of the Moretti family to prevent rival cartels from gutting her father's company. For the first 4 months of their marriage, Gabriel was a phantom. He was breathtakingly handsome, tall with dark, stormy eyes and a jawline carved from granite. But he was entirely indifferent to her. He treated her with a stiff, formal politeness. He never shared her bed, opting for the master suite at the opposite end of the mansion, leaving Beatrice in a sprawling guest wing. Despite herself, Beatrice had begun to fall for him. How could she not? On the rare occasions they shared a dinner table, he would ask about her day with feigned interest. Once, when a rogue lieutenant from a rival crew had cornered her at a charity event, Gabriel had materialized out of thin air, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back, his voice a low, lethal purr as he threatened the man away. In those fleeting moments, Beatrice's foolish heart whispered that maybe, just maybe, this ruthless Mafia boss saw the woman beneath the oversized, shapeless black dresses she wore to hide her body. That delusion violently shattered on a rainy Tuesday in November. Beatrice had been up late, nursing a mug of chamomile tea. She had baked a batch of lemon ricotta cookies, a nervous habit she indulged in when the sprawling estate felt too lonely. Hoping to offer Gabriel one, she padded silently down the long, carpeted hallway toward his private study. The heavy mahogany door was cracked open just an inch. Warm golden light spilled onto the Persian runner, accompanied by the clinking of crystal tumblers and the distinct, smoky scent of aged bourbon and Cuban cigars. Gabriel wasn't alone. His underboss, Lorenzo, was with him, along with Valentina, the stunning, stiletto-wearing sister of a prominent associate. Valentina was everything Beatrice was not, sharp-edged, rail-thin, and dripping with malicious confidence. "I just don't understand how you stomach it, Gabriel." Valentina's voice floated through the crack, laced with a cruel, mocking giggle. "I saw her at the country club yesterday. She was wearing a tent. Seriously, A literal black tent. The other wives are laughing behind your back. They think the great Gabriel Moretti has gone soft, settling for a woman who looks like a baker's dough. Beatrice froze. Her hand hovered over the brass doorknob, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She waited for Gabriel to defend her. She waited for that fierce, possessive voice that had protected her at the charity event. Instead, Gabriel let out a low, dark chuckle. "She's my wife on paper, nothing more." Gabriel's voice was smooth, bored, and devastatingly cold. "You think I'd actually touch a woman who looks like a stuffed sausage? Let them laugh, Valentina. While they mock my domestic situation, they forget that because of my baker's dough wife, the Moretti family now controls 70% of the eastern seaboard's shipping lanes. She's a necessary eyesore, a human signature on a contract. As soon as I legally absorb Kensington Shipping into my holding company next year, I'll buy her a villa in Tuscany and never have to look at her again." Lorenzo laughed, a deep, rumbling sound of agreement. "Smart play, boss. Just keep feeding her pasta until the ink is dry." Outside the door, Beatrice didn't gasp. She didn't drop her plate of cookies. The shock was so absolute, so paralyzing, that it completely bypassed sorrow and slammed directly into a cold, clinical numbness. A necessary eyesore, a stuffed sausage, a human signature. She looked down at her soft stomach, at the plush thighs hidden beneath her thick robe. A hot, acidic wave of humiliation washed over her, followed instantly by something much more dangerous. Absolute, unadulterated rage. Gabriel Moretti thought she was just a fat, naive girl who would blindly sign away her father's legacy for a scrap of his attention. He thought her weight made her stupid. He thought her size made her weak. Beatrice slowly backed away from the door, the plate of cookies still perfectly balanced in her trembling hands. She walked back to the kitchen, dumped the cookies directly into the garbage disposal, and flipped the switch, watching the blades tear them to shreds. Gabriel wanted the Kensington ports. He wanted to legally absorb her father's life's work. "Let's see you try, you arrogant bastard," Beatrice whispered to the empty kitchen. The tears finally fell, hot and silent. But they weren't tears of heartbreak. They were the fiery baptism of a woman who had just woken up. The next morning, the atmosphere in the Moretti mansion felt different. Gabriel, sipping his espresso at the head of the impossibly long dining table, didn't immediately notice. He was flipping through the Financial Times, his brow furrowed in concentration. Usually, Beatrice would hover near the sideboard, wearing one of her oversized drab cardigans, nervously asking if his coffee was hot enough, desperate for a crumb of his validation. Today, she walked in, wearing a tailored emerald green pantsuit. It wasn't designed to hide her body. It was cut perfectly to accommodate her wide hips and heavy bust, pulling in sharply at her waist. Her dark hair, usually tied in a messy, apologetic bun, was blown out into sleek, voluminous waves. Gabriel glanced up, his dark eyes flickering with momentary surprise. "You look different today, Beatrice." "I have meetings," she replied, her voice completely devoid of its usual nervous tremor. She didn't look at him. She didn't serve him. She walked straight to the coffee machine, poured her own cup, and sat at the opposite end of the table, opening her laptop. Gabriel frowned, the silence stretching uncomfortably. "Meetings? For what? Lorenzo handles the operational oversight of the Kensington ports." "Lorenzo handles the physical security of the ports, Gabriel," Beatrice said, her eyes never leaving her screen. "I am the CEO of Kensington Global. My father left the company to me, not to your underboss. I have a board meeting at 10. Gabriel's jaw tightened. "We agreed you would take a step back. The transition of the holding companies is complex. I don't want you stressing over logistics. I'm not stressed, Beatrice smiled, finally looking down the table at him. The smile was perfectly polite, perfectly rehearsed, and utterly dead in the eyes. I'm perfectly capable. Have a good day, Gabriel. She stood up, grabbed her briefcase, and walked out, the click of her sensible heels echoing on the marble. Gabriel sat in silence, his espresso suddenly tasting bitter. Something had shifted, though he couldn't quite put his finger on what. Over the next 4 weeks, the necessary eyesore went to war. Beatrice was a savant when it came to corporate law and logistical structuring. While Gabriel was busy running the violent, street-level aspects of his syndicate, Beatrice locked herself in her downtown office, surrounded by mountains of ledgers, shipping manifests, and trust documents. She executed a brilliant, deeply complex restructuring of Kensington Global. Step 1. She identified the exact shipping lanes Gabriel was using to smuggle his untaxed goods. Step 2. She quietly transferred the ownership of Pier 47, the crown jewel of the operation, out of the primary Kensington Trust and into a secondary holding shell company based in the Cayman Islands. Step 3. She named herself the sole irrevocable beneficiary of that shell company, adding a poison pill clause. If she died, or if her marriage to Gabriel ended in divorce, Pier 47 would instantly be donated to the federal government for a new Coast Guard base. Gabriel was completely in the dark. He was too busy being utterly perplexed by his wife's behavior at home. The meek, fawning girl was gone. Beatrice treated Gabriel exactly as he had described her, like a business partner on paper. If he came home late, she didn't wait up. If he hosted his capos in the drawing room, she didn't shrink into the background. She walked right through, head held high, ignoring their stares. She also stopped hiding her body. She threw away every tent-like dress she owned. She hired a private stylist who specialized in plus-size couture. She wore rich burgundy silks, deep navy wrap dresses, and bold crimson lipsticks. She was heavy, yes, but she moved with a sudden commanding majesty that demanded the room's attention. Gabriel found himself watching her. It started as suspicion, but it morphed into a strange, gnawing obsession. He would catch himself staring at the curve of her hip as she walked up the stairs, or the way the soft flesh of her throat moved when she swallowed a glass of wine. One evening, a week before the annual syndicate gala, Gabriel cornered Lorenzo in his study. "What the hell is going on with Beatrice?" Gabriel snapped, pouring a massive measure of scotch. "She's like a different person. She's cold. She barely speaks to me, unless it's to ask a logistical question." Lorenzo rubbed the back of his neck. "I don't know, boss. But the guys at the port have noticed, too. She came down to Pier 47 yesterday, walked right past our armed guards, chewed out the dockmaster for a scheduling error, and left. The men were intimidated." Gabriel stared into his glass. He had wanted a docile, invisible wife. Now he had a fiercely independent, dangerously intelligent woman living in his house who seemed completely immune to his charm. And to his immense frustration, her coldness was driving him insane. He wanted the old Beatrice back, the one who looked at him with stars in her eyes. He wanted to break this icy facade. "Make sure she's ready for the gala next week," Gabriel grunted. "I want her by my side. Let's see how this new attitude holds up in front of the entire 5 families." The annual syndicate gala was held in the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel. It was the one night a year where the heads of the 5 major crime families gathered under a temporary truce to drink champagne, flaunt their wealth, and silently plot each other's downfalls. Historically, this was the kind of event Beatrice dreaded. The room was always packed with wise guys in bespoke tuxedos and their wives or mistresses, women who looked like they stepped off the runways of Milan, all sharp collarbones, sheer dresses, and judgmental glares. When Gabriel waited at the bottom of the grand staircase at the estate, adjusting his bow tie, he fully expected Beatrice to emerge in something modest and conservative, trying to shrink herself. He stopped breathing when she appeared at the top of the stairs. Beatrice wore a custom-made, off-the-shoulder gown in a shade of liquid gold. The fabric was masterfully gathered and ruched, hugging her large breasts and thick waist tightly before flowing out into an elegant train. A high slit on one side revealed a thick, powerful thigh encased in shimmering fabric. She wore heavy gold jewelry that draped over her collarbones. She didn't look like she was trying to hide. She looked like a Roman empress who owned the world. Gabriel's mouth went dry. For the first time in his life, he felt a sudden, violent possessiveness over a woman. "You look," Gabriel struggled for the word, "stunning." Beatrice paused on the bottom step, looking at him with eyes as flat and cold as polished onyx. "Thank you, Gabriel. It's what is required for the paperwork, isn't it?" Before he could decipher the venom in her words, she brushed past him, the scent of vanilla and expensive amber trailing behind her, leaving him standing rigidly in the foyer. The moment they walked into the plaza ballroom, heads turned. The whispers started immediately, but they weren't the usual whispers of pity or mockery. They were whispers of shock. Beatrice walked with her back perfectly straight, her arm lightly resting on Gabriel's sleeve, wearing her size like a weapon. Almost immediately, Valentina appeared, clinging to the arm of a lower-tier capo. Valentina's eyes narrowed as she took in Beatrice's golden dress. "Beatrice." "Darling," Valentina purred, dripping with fake sweetness. "You're so brave, wearing something so form-fitting. I could never pull off that much fabric. It must be so heavy." Gabriel tensed, ready to step in, expecting Beatrice to flush red and crumble. Instead, Beatrice smiled softly, looking Valentina up and down with genuine pity. "It takes a certain kind of presence to carry gold, Valentina. Some women are built to be monuments. Others are just scaffolding. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need a drink." She left Valentina standing with her mouth open, her face burning scarlet. Gabriel stared after his wife, completely paralyzed by the effortless brutality of her insult. He didn't have time to process it, because as Beatrice reached the bar, a man stepped into her path. Mateo Vargas. Mateo was the head of the West Coast cartel, a man as equally powerful as Gabriel, but known for his wild, unpredictable nature. He was heavily tattooed under his tuxedo, with a charming, lethal smile. "Mrs. Moretti," Mateo said, his voice a smooth, dark rumble. He didn't look at her like she was an eyesore. His eyes dropped to the deep plunge of her neckline, traveling over her curves with blatant, unhidden hunger. "I must say, Gabriel has kept you hidden away far too long. You are absolutely breathtaking." Across the room, Gabriel saw the interaction. A primal, territorial rage spiked in his chest. He started pushing through the crowd. "Mr. Vargas," Beatrice replied smoothly, "you flatter me." "I never flatter. I only state facts." Mateo stepped closer, completely ignoring Gabriel's rapid approach. "A woman like you shouldn't be wasted on a cold fish like Moretti. You need a man who appreciates a feast, not just a snack." Beatrice laughed, a genuine, throaty sound that made Gabriel's blood boil. But as Mateo leaned in closer, dropping his voice to a whisper meant only for her ears, his charming smile vanished, replaced by dead-eyed seriousness. "I need to speak with you, Beatrice," Mateo whispered rapidly. "Alone. About your father." Beatrice's smile froze. "My father died of a heart attack," Matteo's eyes flicked to Gabriel, who was now only 10 feet away, shoving a waiter aside. Your father's heart medication was replaced with a lethal dosage of digitalis. He was murdered, Beatrice, and the man who ordered the swap is standing right behind you. The ballroom seemed to tilt on its axis. The music, the clinking glasses, the dull roar of conversation all faded into a high-pitched ringing in Beatrice's ears. She turned slowly. Gabriel reached her, his hand clamping possessively around her waist, pulling her flush against his side. His eyes were locked on Matteo in a silent death threat. "Is there a problem here, Vargas?" Gabriel snarled. "No problem, Moretti," Matteo smirked, taking a step back and raising his glass. "Just paying my respects to your lovely wife. She is truly one of a kind." Matteo melted back into the crowd. Gabriel looked down at Beatrice, his anger softening into genuine concern as he noticed her pale face. "Are you all right? Did he disrespect you?" "I'll have his tongue cut out," Gabriel said, his thumb unconsciously stroking the soft curve of her waist. Beatrice looked up at the man who was her husband on paper, the man who called her a stuffed sausage, the man who, if Matteo was telling the truth, had murdered her father to steal his empire. She felt the heat of his hand on her waist, and it made her want to vomit. But she was Robert Kensington's daughter. She didn't break. She planned. "I'm perfectly fine, Gabriel," Beatrice lied, her voice terrifyingly steady, just a little tired. "Take me home." The ride back to the Moretti estate was suffocating. The partition in the Maybach was rolled up, plunging the back seat into an intimate, heavy silence. Gabriel sat too close to Beatrice. The heat radiating from his large frame was palpable, his arm resting on the leather seat directly behind her shoulders. A week ago, this proximity would have sent a thrill down her spine. Now it made her blood run ice-cold. Murdered, the word echoed in her skull with the rhythmic thrum of the car tires. Robert Kensington was a titan, but he was also a gentle father who had bought Beatrice her first telescope, who told her that her mind was a galaxy and her body was simply the vessel that carried it. If Gabriel had orchestrated his death just to steal the ports, Beatrice wouldn't just leave him. She would ruin him. The moment they arrived at the estate, Gabriel reached for her hand as she stepped out of the car. His grip was firm, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "You were extraordinary tonight," Gabriel murmured, his voice dropping an octave, raw with an emotion Beatrice had never heard from him before. "You made every other woman in that room look like a ghost." Beatrice pulled her hand away smoothly, offering a tight, unreadable smile. "I'm just doing my job as a human signature, Gabriel. Good night." She left him standing on the marble steps, his jaw clenched in frustration, completely unaware that his wife had just declared a silent war. The next morning, Beatrice didn't go to her downtown office. She locked herself in her suite and began her own clandestine operation. She knew she couldn't rely on anyone connected to the syndicate or her father's old executive board. She needed an outsider. She needed Dr. Felix Montgomery. Felix was an independent forensic toxicologist based in Boston, a man who owed his career to a scholarship funded anonymously by Robert Kensington. Beatrice had the receipts. She called in the favor. Over the next 48 hours, Beatrice operated with surgical precision, executing a multi-pronged investigation from behind the heavily encrypted firewall of her laptop. Step 1. The exhumation. Order. Through a loophole in her father's living trust, Beatrice legally authorized a private transfer of Robert Kensington's remains from the family mausoleum to Felix's secure laboratory in Massachusetts under the guise of estate compliance testing. Step 2. The medical audit. She hacked into the private server of her father's primary cardiologist, cross-referencing his prescribed dosages with the pharmacy manifests from the month leading up to his death. Step 3. Following the money. Beatrice tracked every financial transaction out of the cardiologist's accounts, looking for offshore anomalies. While Beatrice was digging up graves and digital footprints, Gabriel was spiraling. His sudden obsession with his wife was becoming a distraction. He found himself leaving operational meetings early just to see if she was home. He ordered his men to buy her extravagant gifts: a diamond tennis bracelet, a vintage Rolex, a first-edition copy of her favorite classic novel. Beatrice accepted them all with the same chilling politeness, placing them in a drawer and never looking at them again. She was a fortress he couldn't breach. "She's freezing me out, Lorenzo." Gabriel paced his study on a Thursday evening, a glass of bourbon in his hand. "She wears these dresses that drive me out of my mind. She commands the room. But when I look at her, it's like looking at a stranger. She used to bake cookies, for God's sake." Lorenzo shifted uncomfortably by the door, avoiding Gabriel's intense gaze. "Women are temperamental, boss, especially when they get a taste of power. Just remind her who runs the city. The legal absorption of Kensington shipping is set for next Tuesday. Once you hold the keys to her empire, she'll fall back in line." Gabriel stopped pacing, his eyes narrowing. "I don't want her in line, Lorenzo. I want her looking at me the way she used to." Upstairs, Beatrice was staring at a decrypted financial ledger that made her breath hitch. Dr. Felix Montgomery had sent the toxicology report an hour ago. Mateo Vargas was right. Robert Kensington had lethal levels of digitalis in his tissue, masking a heart attack. It was cold-blooded murder. But it was the financial trail that made Beatrice's hands shake with rage. The cardiologist who had signed off on her father's death certificate had received a wire transfer of $5 million exactly 12 hours after Robert died. The money came from a shell company registered in Cyprus. Beatrice spent 6 hours breaking down the shell company's corporate veil. When she finally cracked the ultimate beneficiary, she didn't find Gabriel's name. She found Lorenzo's, Gabriel's trusted underboss, the man who had laughed along with Valentina outside the study. Lorenzo had murdered her father to expedite the hostile takeover of the ports, ensuring the Moretti family, and by extension, Lorenzo himself, gained ultimate control. But a burning question remained. Did Gabriel order it, or did Lorenzo act alone? Beatrice closed her laptop, the glow of the screen fading from her face. It didn't matter. They were both complicit. Gabriel wanted to absorb her father's legacy and throw her away like garbage. Lorenzo had spilled her father's blood. They were going to pay, and the trap was all real. Ready, set. Tuesday morning arrived with a violent thunderstorm, painting the New York skyline in bruised purples and grays. It was the perfect backdrop for a massacre, even a corporate one. The boardroom of the Moretti Holding Company was a cavernous space of glass and steel, perched on the 45th floor of a midtown skyscraper. Gabriel sat at the head of the long oak table, flanked by Lorenzo and a team of high-priced, ruthless syndicate lawyers. Gabriel looked exhausted but triumphant. Today was the day he officially absorbed Kensington Global. He wore a sharp charcoal Brioni suit, his dark hair slicked back. He checked his watch. "Where is she?" Lorenzo muttered, drumming his fingers on the table. "She's 10 minutes late. Disrespectful." "Keep your mouth shut, Lorenzo," Gabriel snapped, his patience wearing thin. He defended her out of instinct now. The heavy glass doors swung open. Beatrice walked in. If she looked like a queen at the gala, today she looked like an executioner. She wore a sharply tailored, blood-red trench coat over a black pencil skirt that accentuated her generous hips and thick, powerful thighs. Her heels clicked against the hardwood floor with rhythmic authority. She was entirely alone. No lawyers, no assistants. She carried a single slim leather folder. Gabriel stood up instinctively, mesmerized by the sheer force of her presence. The red coat against her fair skin made her look dangerously vibrant. "Beatrice," Gabriel said, his voice softening. "Take a seat. The contracts are ready for your signature." Beatrice didn't sit. She walked to the opposite end of the table, standing directly across from Gabriel. She tossed the leather folder onto the polished oak. It slid perfectly across the surface, stopping inches from Gabriel's hands. "I won't be signing anything today, Gabriel," Beatrice said, her voice echoing clearly in the large room. The syndicate lawyers exchanged confused glances. Lorenzo sneered. "Listen, sweetheart. We don't have time for a temper tantrum. Sign the paper so we can get back to real business." Beatrice's eyes snapped to Lorenzo, cold and dead. "You're right, Lorenzo. Let's talk about real business. Specifically, Pier 47. Gabriel frowned, opening the folder she had thrown. "What about Pier 47? It's the primary asset in the Kensington Trust." "It was the primary asset," Beatrice corrected, placing both hands on the table and leaning forward, letting the boardroom feel the full weight of her authority. "Open the file, Gabriel." Gabriel flipped open the folder. His eyes scanned the top document, a legal restructuring form stamped by the Federal Trade Commission. His brow furrowed in confusion, which quickly morphed into disbelief and then into absolute, silent shock. Gabriel assumed Pier 47 remained a transferable Kensington asset, granting him unrestricted contraband access as the ultimate beneficiary. In reality, Beatrice secretly transferred ownership to a non-transferable Cayman shell company, freezing syndicate access. She made herself the sole beneficiary, adding a poison pill triggering immediate federal seizure if harmed. "What the hell is this?" Gabriel whispered, his voice dangerously low. "It means you've been playing checkers while I've been playing chess, Gabriel," Beatrice said smoothly. "For the last month, I have systematically hollowed out Kensington Global. You thought I was just a fat, naive girl who would blindly sign away her father's legacy for a scrap of your attention. You thought I was a human signature, a stuffed sausage. Wasn't that the term you and Valentina used?" Gabriel's head snapped up. The color drained from his face. She heard. The realization hit him like a physical blow to the chest. The night in the study, the sudden change in her wardrobe, the icy demeanor. She had heard every cruel, calculating word he had spoken. "Beatrice, you heard that?" Gabriel breathed out, the ruthless Mafia boss suddenly looking entirely unmoored. "I heard every word," Beatrice affirmed, her voice devoid of sadness. "And it woke me up. You see, Gabriel, Pier 47 is no longer part of Kensington Global. It belongs to a blind trust that only I control. And if you force my hand, if you try to divorce me, or if anything unfortunate happens to me, the ownership of that pier instantly transfers to the United States Coast Guard." The lawyers erupted into panicked murmurs. Lorenzo jumped to his feet, his face red with rage. "You stupid bitch! You just signed your own death warrant!" "Sit down, Lorenzo," Beatrice ordered, her voice cracking like a whip. She didn't flinch. "Before you threaten me, you should know I sent a copy of this file to Mateo Vargas this morning. He was very interested to learn that the Moretti family's primary smuggling route is now entirely dependent on my goodwill." "You went to Vargas!" Gabriel roared, slamming his hands on the table, the betrayal piercing him deeper than the loss of the ports. The thought of Beatrice conspiring with Mateo, a man who had looked at her with such blatant hunger, ignited a violent jealousy in Gabriel's chest. "I went to the man who told me the truth," Beatrice fired back, her eyes blazing. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a second document, the financial ledger. Matteo told me my father was murdered, and he was right. She threw the ledger onto the table. It scattered across the wood. Lethal levels of digitalis, paid for by a shell company in Cyprus, a company owned by you, Lorenzo. Beatrice pointed directly at the underboss. The boardroom plunged into a deafening silence. The lawyers stopped breathing. Gabriel slowly turned his head to look at Lorenzo. The look in Gabriel's eyes was no longer that of a frustrated husband. It was the look of the devil. Lorenzo. Gabriel's voice was barely a whisper, yet it commanded the entire room. Tell me my wife is lying. Lorenzo swallowed hard, taking a step back from the table. Boss? Robert Kensington was dragging his feet. He was never going to agree to the marriage or the merger. I did what had to be done to secure the family's future. I did it for us. Before anyone could blink, Gabriel moved. He vaulted across the corner of the oak table with terrifying speed. He grabbed Lorenzo by the throat and slammed him against the floor-to-ceiling glass window. The glass shuddered violently under the impact. You killed her father without my order? Gabriel snarled, his forearm pressing against Lorenzo's windpipe. You made my wife an orphan, and you set me up to take the fall. Beatrice watched the violence unfold with a calm, clinical detachment. The Mafia boss was doing exactly what she had calculated he would do. Gabriel. Beatrice's voice cut through the room, cool and commanding. Gabriel froze. He looked back at her over his shoulder, his chest heaving, his eyes wild with violence and a twisted, desperate adoration for the woman standing before him. She wasn't just a physical presence anymore. She was a tactical genius who had brought his entire syndicate to its knees without firing a single shot. Let him go, Beatrice instructed. His fate is no longer yours to decide. Gabriel slowly released his grip, letting Lorenzo slide to the floor, gasping for air. Gabriel stood up, straightening his suit jacket, his eyes completely locked on Beatrice. The power dynamic in the room, in their marriage, had completely inverted. What do you want, Beatrice? Gabriel asked, his voice thick with a sudden, overwhelming reverence. Beatrice smiled. It was a terrifying, beautiful smile. I want everything, she said, and we are going to renegotiate the terms of our paper marriage, right now. The silence in the boardroom was absolute, broken only by the ragged, desperate breathing of Lorenzo as he scraped himself off the floor. Gabriel remained standing, his broad chest rising and falling, his dark eyes entirely fixated on the woman in the red trench coat. The anger that had nearly caused him to rip Lorenzo's throat out had vanished, replaced by an intoxicating, all-consuming awe. Beatrice had dismantled him, his underboss, and his legal team in under 5 minutes. Renegotiate, Gabriel repeated, the word tasting like a vow on his tongue. He walked slowly back to his chair, but he didn't sit. He leaned against the polished oak, completely surrendering the authority of the room to her. Name your terms, Beatrice. Beatrice opened the leather folder again, pulling out a crisp, single sheet of paper. She slid it across the table. This is the new arrangement, Beatrice said, her voice echoing with cold precision. You no longer absorb Kensington Global. We merge as equals. I retain 51% voting control of the logistics division. You retain operational control of the syndicate's street-level enterprises, but not a single crate moves through my ports without my explicit sign-off. The lead lawyer, a silver-haired shark from the prestigious firm Cravath, Swain and Moore, adjusted his glasses nervously. Mrs. Moretti, with all due respect, a 51% stake gives you unilateral power to freeze the syndicate's income at any time. That, Beatrice smiled, her eyes gleaming like polished obsidian, is exactly the point. She turned her gaze back to Gabriel. Furthermore, My father's murderer is mine to punish. Lorenzo doesn't get the mercy of a quick bullet." Lorenzo scrambled to his feet, his face pale, pointing a shaking finger at her. "You think I'm afraid of a fat, pampered heiress? Gabriel, you can't let this bitch dictate." Gabriel didn't even look at Lorenzo. He just flicked 2 fingers in the air. Immediately, the 2 massive enforcers standing by the double doors stepped forward, grabbing Lorenzo by the arms and driving him to his knees. "What do you want done with him?" Gabriel asked softly, his eyes only for his wife. "I've already done it," Beatrice replied. Dr. Felix Montgomery's toxicology report, along with Lorenzo's offshore banking records in Cyprus, were anonymously couriered to the FBI field office in Manhattan 20 minutes ago. Lorenzo is going to federal prison for wire fraud, racketeering, and murder. He'll rot in a 6x9 cell at ADX Florence for the rest of his natural life. And I have emptied his Cayman accounts. Every cent he stole is currently being donated to a battered women's shelter in the Bronx. Lorenzo let out a primal scream of rage, struggling against the enforcers, but Gabriel simply nodded. "Get him out of my sight. Leave him on the steps of the federal courthouse." As the enforcers dragged Lorenzo out, kicking and screaming, Beatrice calmly closed her folder. "Are we in agreement on the terms, Gabriel?" Gabriel looked at the woman he had dismissed, mocked, and ignored. He saw the lush, heavy curves of her body, the sharp, brilliant mind that had outmaneuvered him, and the absolute fire in her eyes. He had wanted a docile shadow. Instead, he had married a son, and he was perfectly willing to burn. He picked up a gold fountain pen and signed his name at the bottom of her contract without reading the rest of it. "We are in agreement, Mia Regina," Gabriel murmured, "my queen." The shift in the Moretti Empire was tectonic. Over the next month, Beatrice did not just step into the underworld. She dominated it. She restructured the syndicate's laundering operations with terrifying efficiency. The men who had once whispered insults about her size now bowed their heads when she walked into a room. Gabriel, for his part, was a man possessed. His cold indifference had evaporated, replaced by a desperate, borderline obsessive need to win the wife he had already married. He tried to court her. He started coming home early, dismissing his capos just to sit in the kitchen and watch her read. He bought out the entire dining room of Le Bernardin, Manhattan's most exclusive seafood restaurant, just for the 2 of them. During that dinner, Beatrice sat across from him in a deep plum velvet dress that clung to her heavy thighs and generous bust. Gabriel couldn't take his eyes off her. He slid a velvet box across the white tablecloth. "I don't want your diamonds, Gabriel," Beatrice said coldly, not making a move to open it. "You can't buy my forgiveness with jewelry." "It's not a diamond," Gabriel said, his voice a low, rough rumble. "Open it." Reluctantly, Beatrice flipped the lid. Inside rested a Patek Philippe Grand Complications watch, a masterpiece of mechanical engineering, encased in brushed rose gold with a midnight blue dial. "You don't need diamonds," Gabriel said, leaning forward, the candlelight catching the fierce intensity in his dark eyes. "You don't need anything to make you beautiful. You are the most breathtaking woman I have ever seen. I bought you this because it is a masterpiece of precision, just like your mind. I don't want to buy you, Beatrice. I want to earn your time." Beatrice stared at the watch, a tiny crack forming in the ice around her heart. It was the most thoughtful, deeply personal gift she had ever received. He saw her. He truly saw her. But before she could respond, Gabriel's encrypted phone buzzed violently on the table. The screen flashed a high-priority red alert. Gabriel answered it, his expression shifting from vulnerable lover to ruthless warlord in a fraction of a second. "Speak." He listened for 10 seconds, his jaw locking so tight the muscle twitched. He hung up and looked at Beatrice, his eyes completely black with fury. "It's Mateo Vargas," Gabriel said, standing up and throwing a $100 bill on the table for a dinner they barely touched. "He didn't just want to tell you about your father, Beatrice. He used the chaos of Lorenzo's arrest to slip 100 armed men into Brooklyn. He just stormed Pier 47. Beatrice's blood ran cold. "He thinks because you put the pier in a blind trust, I won't defend it," Gabriel sneered, pulling his Sig Sauer from his shoulder holster and racking the slide. "He thinks he can take what's yours." Beatrice stood up, her plum velvet dress swishing. She didn't panic. She reached into her purse and pulled out her own encrypted tablet. "He's right, Gabriel. You aren't going to defend it," Beatrice said, her voice dropping into a deadly calm register. "We are." The rain was coming down in sheets as the armored Maybach tore through the empty streets of the Brooklyn Navy Yard, flanked by 3 black SUVs filled with Gabriel's deadliest enforcers. The air inside the car was thick with tension, smelling of ozone, expensive cologne, and gun oil. Gabriel sat beside Beatrice, strapping a Kevlar vest over his dress shirt. "You stay in the car," Gabriel ordered, his voice brokering no argument. "Mateo's men are heavily armed. This is a street war, Beatrice. It's not a boardroom." Beatrice didn't argue. She simply pulled up the architectural blueprints of Pier 47 on her tablet. "Mateo doesn't know about the automated crane overrides," she said rapidly, typing lines of code into the terminal. "He thinks he has the high ground in Warehouse 3. I am locking the blast doors on the loading bay and turning the internal security floodlights to strobe. It will blind his snipers." Gabriel paused, looking at his wife, his chest tightening with a violent wave of affection. She was brilliant. She was lethal. As they pulled into the sprawling, container-stacked labyrinth of Pier 47, the night erupted into chaos. Gunfire echoed like thunder over the rain. Gabriel's men poured out of the SUVs, exchanging heavy fire with the Vargas cartel soldiers entrenched behind the shipping containers. Gabriel kissed the top of Beatrice's head, a fierce, desperate press of his lips. "Lock the doors. Do not leave this car." He threw himself into the storm, a shadow of violence moving through the rain. Beatrice watched through the bulletproof glass as her husband became a force of nature, his aim flawless, his brutality unmatched. He was fighting for her empire. He was fighting for her. Inside the Maybach, Beatrice executed her digital war. She tapped the final command on her tablet. Tactical override initiated. Warehouse 3. Blast doors sealed. Grid lighting. Strobe activated. Gantry cranes 4 and 5. Autonomous sweep mode. Across the pier, the massive multi-ton steel shipping containers hanging from the gantry cranes suddenly swung violently, guided by Beatrice's override, smashing into the catwalks where Mateo's snipers were positioned, forcing them to scatter in panic. The blinding strobe lights disoriented the cartel completely. Gabriel's men surged forward, breaking the cartel's defensive line. But then, the passenger door of the Maybach was suddenly ripped open. Beatrice gasped. A Vargas soldier, covered in blood, grabbed her arm, trying to drag her out of the vehicle. Beatrice didn't scream. She used her weight. She threw her entire body backward, driving her stiletto heel squarely into the man's kneecap. Bone crunched. The man howled, dropping his weapon. Before he could recover, Gabriel materialized out of the rain. He didn't shoot the man. He grabbed him by the throat and threw him against the side of the car, neutralizing him with a single, devastating strike. Gabriel looked into the car, his chest heaving, rain plastering his hair to his forehead. Blood smeared his cheek. I told you to stay in the car, Gabriel roared, terrified by how close he had come to losing her. He opened the door, Gabriel, Beatrice yelled back, her adrenaline spiking. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the rain, amplified by a megaphone from the roof of a nearby container. A touching domestic dispute, Mateo Vargas's voice sneered. Mateo stepped out from the shadows of a container, holding a heavy assault rifle. 10 of his remaining elite guards flanked him, laser sights cutting through the rain, all pointed directly at Gabriel's chest. Gabriel's own men were pinned down on the far side of the warehouse. He was trapped. Mateo smiled, wiping rain from his eyes. You put up a good fight, Moretti, but you're outnumbered. Now step away from the car. The ports are mine. And the woman, well, I told her she needed a man who appreciates a feast. Gabriel didn't flinch. He stepped completely in front of the open car door, shielding Beatrice's body with his own. He raised his handgun, aiming squarely at Mateo's head. If you want my wife, Mateo, Gabriel said, his voice echoing with absolute, terrifying calm, you will have to dig her out of my dead hands. Mateo laughed. If you insist. He raised his rifle. Gabriel, drop down, Beatrice screamed. She didn't wait for him to move. She reached over the center console and slammed her hand onto the Maybach's horn, simultaneously hitting the final kill switch on her tablet. The sound of the horn was entirely drowned out by the deafening roar of a dual-mounted Browning M2 machine gun firing a warning shot into the sky. Suddenly, the harbor was bathed in blinding, intense spotlights. 3 massive United States Coast Guard Sentinel-class cutters breached the fog, their sirens wailing, flanked by a half-dozen heavily armed tactical SWAT boats. "Federal agents, drop your weapons!" A voice boomed from a marine loudspeaker, echoing across the water. Mateo Vargas froze, his face draining of color. The cartel soldiers panicked, dropping their rifles and putting their hands in the air. Gabriel lowered his gun, looking out at the water in absolute shock. He turned back to Beatrice. She sat in the leather seat, her chest heaving, the tablet glowing in her lap. "I told you, Gabriel," Beatrice breathed, a triumphant, wild smile spreading across her face. "If anyone tried to take this pier from me, it instantly transfers to the Coast Guard." Mateo Vargas cursed, dropping his rifle as federal agents swarmed the docks, throwing him to the concrete and snapping cuffs on his wrists. The hostile takeover was crushed under the weight of the federal government. Beatrice had just eliminated the West Coast cartel's leadership without firing a single bullet. An hour later, the estate was deadly quiet. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind an exhausted, heavy intimacy. Gabriel sat on the edge of the velvet sofa in Beatrice's suite. His dress shirt was ruined, his knuckles bruised. Beatrice stood before him, holding a warm, damp towel, gently wiping the blood and grease from his face. She had traded her velvet dress for a silk robe, the soft fabric clinging to her full breasts and wide hips. Gabriel stared up at her. He didn't look like a Mafia boss. He looked like a man standing before a deity. "You gave them the pier," Gabriel whispered, wincing slightly as she dabbed a cut on his cheek. "You gave up your father's greatest asset just to save my life." "My father built an empire of steel and concrete, Gabriel," Beatrice said softly, her fingers tracing his jawline. "It was just a thing. I can rebuild it. I can buy 10 more piers tomorrow. But I couldn't rebuild you." Gabriel's breath hitched. He reached up, his large, calloused hands gripping her thick, soft waist. He pulled her forward, burying his face in the soft flesh of her stomach, his arms wrapping tightly around her back. "I was a fool," Gabriel's voice broke, muffled against the silk of her robe. "I was a blind, arrogant fool. I mocked you to impress a room full of sycophants. I called you names because I was terrified of how much you intimidated me, even then. I am so deeply sorry, Beatrice." He looked up at her, his dark eyes shining with unfiltered devotion. "You are not a human signature. You are not a necessary evil. You are my queen. You are the only thing in this world that matters to me. I worship the ground you walk on. I worship every inch of you." He slowly stood up, pushing the silk robe off her shoulders. It pooled at her feet, leaving her standing in nothing but sheer, black lace lingerie. For the first time in her life, Beatrice didn't feel the urge to hide her stomach. She didn't try to cover her thick thighs or her heavy arms. Under Gabriel's burning, reverent gaze, she felt magnificent. She felt like a goddess of war and abundance. Gabriel traced the curve of her hip, his touch feather-light and shaking. He leaned in, pressing a hot, searing kiss to the soft flesh of her stomach, making her gasp. "Perfect," he whispered against her skin. He moved up, his lips trailing fire over her ribs, to the heavy curve of her breasts, until his mouth finally captured hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was desperate, bruising, and deeply possessive. Beatrice kissed him back with equal ferocity, her hands tangling in his dark hair, pulling him closer. He swept her off her feet, carrying her weight effortlessly, and laid her on the massive canopy bed. That night, Gabriel Moretti didn't make love to a business partner. He worshipped his wife. He kissed every curve, every soft edge, proving with every touch, every breathless whisper in the dark, that she was his entire world. He loved her violently, completely, and endlessly. The next morning, the underworld woke up to a new reality. Gabriel and Beatrice Moretti ruled New York not as a king and a shadow, but as two absolute titans. They were feared, they were respected, and they were untouchable. And anyone who ever dared to whisper a word about the Queen's size quickly learned that the Moretti family had a very strict, very permanent zero-tolerance policy. Did you love the twist in this Mafia romance? Beatrice proved that true power isn't about fitting into society's mold. It's about breaking the mold over your enemies' heads. If you want more stories of brilliant, fierce women taking over the underworld and the ruthless men who worship them, you know what to do. Smash that like button, share this video with your fellow romance lovers, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a dramatic drop. Drop a crown emoji in the comments if you stand with Queen Beatrice. See you in the next story.